What was it like growing up as the son of Eddie Graham?
Whew. Well, I mean, in Amarillo, Texas, and then we moved to New York. And once kids at school found out who my father was, it was fighting continually. And my mom would have problems trying to go to the grocery stores, and it was very difficult. My father was a very disliked man in Amarillo and in New York, and it was hard. It was very difficult. That's why we moved to Florida, and he changed his career and style of wrestling and got involved with the Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch and started doing community service stuff and everything, so that the people would kind of leave us alone. And when they did say something, it was in a positive manner, you know. And it made it a lot easier, but it was tough. It was tough growing up like that.
You want to touch upon maybe why your father wasn't liked? Can you touch upon
Oh
it?
God, he was a villain. He was bad to the bone. He and Dr. Jerry Graham was wrestling Don Curtis and Mark Lewin and all the good guys that were in New York. And he was, you know, they had the sequin gowns and bleach blonde hair, and he came from wrestling in Amarillo, where violence and tough guy status was very important. And when he hit New York, it was like a hurricane. I mean, he was, you know, the Latin population didn't like him because he was beating all their local heroes and the crowds. And he always drove a convertible car. And I remember more than one time he would go someplace and the people would take knives. If they found his car, they'd cut the convertible top off of it.
Oh, man.
And he'd have to like go and get a park, try to hide his car, get in a cab and go to the building to work, and then try to sneak out so that people couldn't follow him to find out where he was parking his car, so they wouldn't go the next week and cut his top off.
Oh, jeez.
So it was crazy.
Wow. How young were you when you started going to the shows with your dad?
I started going to wrestling matches when I was probably 10, 11, somewhere in there. I know I was wrestling amateur. I started wrestling amateur when I was 9, and going to the gym, and because that was kind of my time for my mom to have time for her to do stuff. Was my dad to take me to the gym to lift weights, teach me how to lift weights and work out and all that. Mm-hmm. And so I was probably around 10 when I started going to the matches.
Okay. Do you have any funny stories about people either, you know, eating dinner over your house or sleeping at your house? I'm sure that plenty did. I mean, anything, you know, like bizarre of really, you know.
Yeah, Dad was really, you know, he kept his family life private. I mean, we would have parties, you know, different wrestling promoters, Jim Crockett Sr., Vince McMahon Sr., Jim Barnett from Atlanta. Different promoters would come in town, and he would bring them to the house for meetings and stuff like that. And we'd be in the gym. We had a gym in our garage, so we'd be in the gym working out and everything. And he'd introduce different people to us and that kind of stuff. But pretty much kept his home thing separate from his business. You know?
Which I guess that was good for you guys. You know,
yeah. Home was home, and if he had business to attend to, whatever, then they would either go to the sportatorium, or I remember going out to the airport and getting on his airplane and flying down to Lauderdale on a pretty regular basis after the time I was about 17 or 18, going to see Vince McMahon Sr., talking about the wrestling in New York and what he thought of Dad's opinion of this wrestler was or that wrestler and all that kind of stuff. So it was pretty much home was home, and he took care of business when he was on the road.
When did you know that you wanted to be in the business? Was it from early or?
You know, I knew I wanted to be involved in the wrestling business when I was going to college. And I'm sitting at a restaurant and kind of low lights, and I had my girlfriend with me, and we're having a nice meal, and keep looking at the guy that's waiting on us. I'm thinking to myself, I know that guy from somewhere. When the dinner was over, it dawned on me it was one of my college professors. And I said, you know, I was like 18, and I thought, wow, this is, to me, a college professor was supposed to be the epitome of intelligence. They were supposed to be the best. They were, you know, I mean, they could fail you or pass you, or they were like your thing. And he doesn't make enough money he's got to wait tables and want his students to give him a tip to survive. Right. And there I was promoting wrestling events and had a pocket full of money and everything else. So I pretty much knew then, I think I know what I want to do. I want to be somehow, some way in the wrestling business.
Well, that's good. Instead of waiting tables, I guess.
Yeah, instead of working a full-time job and waiting tables to have enough money.
Nothing's wrong waiting with tables.
No. But there he was, a college professor, best education, and had to wait tables because he couldn't make enough money.
Scary.
As a college professor.
When did your dad expose kayfabe to you?
He never really did. Jack Brisco was the guy that I went down to the Sportatorium and I trained with Jack for a couple months, and then Hero for a year. But Jack was the guy that talked to me and opened my eyes and exposed me to a lot of things in the wrestling business. He had been my coach in high school, Jack, when he came to Florida. I worked out with him a lot as an amateur before I turned pro. But and my dad just kind of acted like it never really happened. He just said one day I was an amateur, the next day I was a pro, and he didn't have to get involved in it.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
When you were a kid, how did the other wrestlers treat you? Did they?
Everybody was always nice, my dad had a lot of respect from all the wrestlers and all the promoters. He was one of the first guys that made the crossover from back in the 50s. You either wrestled or you were a promoter, and you really didn't make that bond. But about the same time he was doing the thing in Florida, Fritz Von Erich was going into Texas, and Roy Shires, who was a wrestler, was going into California, and there were different wrestlers becoming involved in promotion. So he knew all those people, and he had a lot of respect from the wrestlers because he wrestled, and he had respect from the promoters because he did such a good job promoting and creativity and TVs and everything else. So, I was treated with a lot of respect wherever we went. Everybody was very nice because everybody liked my dad. He was a good guy.
Good.
Treated everyone very honestly and fairly, and he was a good guy.
In this business, which is not, that's a rarity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a time back when the steel window fell on your dad
at the National Guard Armory.
How did your dad was out for a year?
Yeah.
How did he take that? Being
No, he still went to after he was out really and home for probably a couple weeks, and then he had to fly to Houston, and it ripped the retinas in his eyes. And back then, laser surgery, because I was just out of high school, so I was 17. It's 68 maybe, because I drove my car to the hospital. I just got a call, said my dad was in the hospital. I really didn't know why, and so I'm laying on the stretcher. He was cut from eyeball to eyeball. The head was all swollen. Holy smokes, what happened? And he was home for a little while, but he immediately was getting up, going to the office, taking care of business, then flew to Houston and did the eye surgery where they took the laser because it hit him right across the forehead. His head went through the glass and the steel frame hit him here, and it put so much pressure that it made his eyeballs go long. Well, when it defigured his eyes at that moment of impact, the retinas tore. So he was blind in one eye. Gorgeous George blinded him in one eye. And so his good eye, then they were afraid would fill up with fluid and he would be blind. Oh. So that's when he made the decision to go to Houston and get the laser thing to seal up his eyes so that it wouldn't fill with fluid and eventually go blind. But that took a while. But still, he was going to the office and staying busy and, all that kind of jazz. Because back then we ran 7 towns a week. We wrestled every night. So there was something to do at the office every day. It wasn't, like, they just ran, twice a month or something. We ran 7 towns a night, 52 weeks a year. So he stayed busy in the office.
Before you got in, earlier on, maybe before you got into business, did you ever sit on your dad's booking meetings ever?
No.
Or that happened?
That basically happened once I started working out with... Once my dad knew he wanted me to be in the wrestling business and he wanted me to wrestle, and I started spending time with Jack Brisco and training with him and all that kind of stuff. That's then when I was allowed to go or sit in his office at a booking meeting or go with him to see Vince McMahon Sr. at his home in Lauderdale and stuff like that. But before then, no, I was never allowed to. I could go to the matches or stuff, but I was never allowed to be in any meetings or listen to any business or any of that kind of stuff.
we're at an NWA convention right now, and it's a question I ask you: do you have any early memories of the NWA conventions that they used to do back in the day?
Oh, sure. Gosh, I started going to the National Wrestling Alliance conventions when I was about 13, and seeing all the Roy Shires and the Fritz von Erichs and all the different promoters from all the different places. And I guess I was kind of older than their kids, but younger than them, and they all used to give me cash to get their younger boys hooked up. So all the young guys from Kerry Von Erich to Don Owen's son, I mean, a bunch of them. I was kind of their mentor, their evening mentor, while the dads were with the wives out having dinner and doing that stuff. They would, come on, Mike, you're single. Here's some money, A couple of boys have a good time. Well, okay. So yeah, the National Wrestling Alliance meetings were a good time, a lot of fun.
Good. When you got into the business, did you feel immediate pressure of who your dad was, you being his son? Was there pressure? How did you?
Oh yeah, I mean, here, I was. He prepared me. I was 5-time state AAU amateur wrestling champion before I turned pro. I was the first person in Florida to ever bench press 400 pounds at a 198 body weight in AAU competition. A couple years later, I did a 455 at a 198 body weight, which were things. So I was strong. I could wrestle. He gave me all the tools to get as good as I could get before I turned pro. But even at that, the pressure really, and a lot of it came from him because I wanted to do good for him. Because he was one of those guys that would sit on the railing at the armory and watch everything I did. And when I came back to the dressing room, why'd you do this? Why didn't you do that? Boom, 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 boom. No, you laid your head, you let your head hang down too far. You should have kept your hands up. It was a constant school, of every night. Every night I loved going someplace where he wasn't going to be because I knew I could go out, I could wrestle, I could come back, and it wasn't constant scrutiny.
Okay. What made your dad such a great booker?
That's one of those things that what made Barry Windham such a great wrestler at such a young age. What makes Brett Favre the guy? They have the it factor. He was around a lot of very, very smart men. Dory Funk Sr. and Doc Sarpolis and everything out in the Texas area in 1958, 59, 57, 58, 59, through that era. Then we went to New York. Of course, Vince McMahon Sr. was there, and he was very intelligent, very sharp promoter and marketing and different things. So he kind of took bits and pieces from all these people that he met and pulled out what was important to him, and then kind of molded them all together and came up with his own pattern, his own formula. I mean, he could sit in the dressing room and watch two guys walking around putting their tights and everything on and see something in them that he could get out of them in the ring. He could just watch people and his ideas, his brain was constantly going, and he could always find something, some reason, good versus evil, big versus small, poor versus rich. He could always come up with a reason for two people to be in a contest against each other, and logical reason, and he had that knack about being able to do that. And a lot of other people see themselves as the star, and he never saw himself as a star. He'd work on the fourth match or the main event if he thought it was going to make money, or he would put himself on the card wherever he thought he could add the most to the card. So he was never greedy or selfish or any of that kind of stuff. And he just had a good overall look at it and was very honest and open with everyone.
Okay. Memories of training with Boris Malenko and Hero? And did he ever...
I never really trained with Malenko. I went to his he had a training camp, and I went there one time, but I worked out with Carl Gotch.
Okay.
I never really trained with Malenko. Matsuda was 2-3 times a week for a couple years. And, he was an awesome athlete, awesome trainer. He started probably the largest number of turned out to be very successful professional wrestlers, more than anybody in history ever did. From Hulk Hogan to Steve Keirn and Barry Windham and Kendall Windham and me and Paul Orndorff and Ron Simmons. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. His students that have been very well known and very successful in the wrestling industry.
Did he ever stretch you?
Oh God, yeah. On a regular basis. That was you know, I mean, that you learned and you respected, and you gave you a little different outlook on everything when you knew somebody completely had the ability to hurt you or make you tap out and wasn't afraid to do it. So yeah, Jack Brisco used to poke me in the chest when I was in high school. What's the matter, boy? Ain't you got no guts? I mean, I was just so tired and wore out. And what's the matter, boy? Ain't you got no guts? And just drive you and push you and drive you and push you. And we were coming back from a wrestling tournament. My dad's had learned to fly, and he rented an airplane. We had some real bad weather. Anyway, we wound up landing on the interstate in Melbourne, Florida. And Jack was terrified to fly. He hated flying. So we landed on the interstate, and we stepped out of the airplane on the ground. And I mean, Jack was just soaking wet with sweat. His hands were shaking. And, you know, I mean, I was 17 years old. It was fun and exciting to me. You know, I didn't think about what could have happened, you know. Right. And so I saw my opportunity then. I poked him in the chest and, what's the matter, boy? Ain't you got no guts? And he looked at me and he said, hell no, not when it comes to crashing in an airplane. So it was
payback's a bitch sometimes.
Yeah, that was my little chance to get a shot back at Jack.
When you first started, did you ever think about hiding who you were?
No. Well, that would have been foolish. I mean, my gosh, I had seen a lot of my friends and their fathers were successful business people and everything, and the boys just went a completely other direction, and 99% of them were failures. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if your dad spent 20 years doing something and you had a business and you had knowledge and you had everything there, why go do something different? Mm-hmm. Why fight it? You know, I mean, I had a great opportunity, you know, so I would have been crazy to go change my name or hide my identity or do anything else. That wasn't in the plan. That was never going to happen.
So when you first started out, did any? You said your dad was well liked because he was a good guy and so forth. But were there any veterans took their anger out on you? You know, get a little business to you because of your dad?
Yeah, not really. You know, I mean, and I could take care of myself. You know, a lot of the veterans that from the earlier days that might have had some animosity or something toward my dad was because they weren't as good as they thought they were. Mm-hmm. They probably believed their own advertising, and there wasn't too many of them that could beat me. So, I mean, if they came out and started playing, I was a player. You know, I mean, Jerry Briscoe's about the only guy that every time I was in the ring with him, he was trying to leg dive me. It was quite fun, you might say, but no, I was always treated with respect, and everybody knew. My dad made it clear that, you know, okay, I was his son, but, you know, he wasn't in the ring with me. He gave me an opportunity, and I had the ability to take advantage of that opportunity. He gave a lot of people opportunities. They didn't have the ability. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was always kind of my own person.
How about memories of that very first match and who against who?
Corsica Gene. My first match was my first match was my dad and I and Don Curtis at a Toys for Tots benefit, and we wrestled Eduardo Perez and two other guys, and I don't remember the other two, at a Marine training base in Tampa on Gandy, and it's still there. The building is still there. Yeah. And my second match, that was a tag match. My second match was a one-on-one, was against Corsica Gene in Live Oak, Florida, which was also a benefit. So I got to thinking, I might have not been too smart. My first two matches, I don't get paid for either one of them. I don't know if I'm really wanting to do this anymore or not. But the excitement, the adrenaline, and just breathing, and, you know, it was something. It was pretty cool.
How was it team with your dad then? You know, that adrenaline was flowing when you first, but how was it with your dad? Wasn't that just off the charts?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little, we got disqualified a lot and stuff. It was hard for him to stay on the apron if he thought I was getting hurt, or it was hard for me to stay on the apron if I thought he was getting hurt. Yeah. You know, the camaraderie between father and son is pretty intense, and it's a lot easier for me to stand and watch Kevin Sullivan or Steve Keirn getting beat up as opposed to my dad. You
Right.
know, so it had its good and its bad.
Mhm.
I was always probably more nervous when my father was in the ring with me. I was always trying to do everything as good as I could do it, and until I got over that thing and just let myself start going and flowing, that's when I really started gaining leaps and bounds in wrestling, and improving and feeling comfortable and just not getting tired anymore. And could wrestle an hour every night. Didn't bother me. So our closeness sometimes got in the way, but for most part it was okay.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.